Welcome back, everyone, to the Cyclone Scoop podcast. I'm here with Mike Casazza of Ear Sports. Obviously, we're headed into already the ninth game of the year for Iowa State as they're set to host the West Virginia Mountaineers this week. Mike, thank you so much for coming on this week, my friend.
Pleasure to do this, Nick. It seemed like just yesterday we were doing this in the preseason in Dallas, and look where we are now. So many years and so many months and so many surprises later, huh?
Truly, I mean, you're spot on, and that's why I kind of went to you. I know you guys have a lot of good people over there. And you know that almost goes seamlessly into my first question. This matchup, both teams are 3-5 as we're well into Big 12 play. Maybe not a lot of people kind of pick these teams to win the Big 12, but I would have thought certainly on this end that Iowa State would have had more than 3 wins, basically heading into November at this point. How do you feel West Virginia has been, really throughout the season compared to expectations going into the year?
They have not cleared the bar too often, certainly not often enough. But when you look at the offensive changes they made on the sideline, on the field, and then how some of their years long projects had progressed, namely offensive line, but maybe some maturity that could be physically, that could be mentally, but maturity at receiver. It looked like they were going to have a pretty good offense, and by and large, that's been true. And then you kind of combine that with, I would say, a track record of above average defensive play. The pandemic year, they were number one in the country in pass defense. And they rebounded from kind of a choppy transition from the first year because they had a really abrupt change at the coordinator position. We don't have to go into it. It was pretty ugly, but um, things seem to level out. And all of a sudden, they get stability. They go into last season not as good defensively, but they brought back a lot of people this year that were going to be, they thought, kind of stalwarts on their defensive line, and they'd always been good in the defensive line. Now they're going to have maybe their best defensive line group in quite some time. All they had to do was find some transfers to play defensive back. And man, I don't know if they went over, Nick, but they went pretty close to over when it came to corners and some of the niche safety positions they have. It just hasn't been very good. Just haven't been able to get the offense and the defense on the same page, or they both play well, in the same quarter or the same half, or just so they can get stops and get scores and not have to really overachieve on one end to meet the underachieving of the other. And by and large, when the defense has let them down, I don't think that they expected that. I think they expected to have a good offense and even normal expected play on defense. Probably have a lot more than 3 wins. That just hasn't happened.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, and it's almost polar opposites compared to Iowa State. I,
Mm.
I I certainly expected a good defense. Iowa State has had a great defense by most metrics, top 10 in the country, really, for a lot of this season. But the offense just has not been there. West Virginia, on the other side, it feels like every time, I see a highlight or I'm checking the box scores, doing some research for this week, they're still able to put up points. How has JT Daniels really kind of been able to lead that offense? Where has he impressed you? And how has that duo maybe been with Bryce Ford Wheaton out at wideout, or some of the names we really expected to hear coming into the year?
I think when you just look at the numbers for Daniels, how about this, Nick? If you looked at their offensive improvements, and if you look at, let's not say 19 because that was so tough, and 20 was difficult, but like last year they had somewhat of a veteran group, a lot of the same players they had this year. But from last year to this year, and you look at the differences in the growth margins, you would think that Daniels has had a terrific season. And here we are, 8 games in. You'd be thinking, man, he's got to be pushing like 20 touchdowns. And how many picks does he have? What's his yard per attempt? What's his yards per game? Go look at his numbers. Again, compare last year offensively versus this year offensively, points per game, yards per game, so on and so forth. It's not because of Daniels. So you would say, wow, this transfer didn't work out. I would disagree with you there because I think in some time, if they got together and they buried a time capsule for this season and they unearthed it 25 years from now, they would be like, man, how did Daniels, maybe Graham Harrell and Neil Brown make this work with, receivers who were experienced, but really not dynamic, not game breakers, with a running game that, your star player is a guy who showed up on campus as a tight end and three guys, and you're trying to get one hot every game, but you're just kind of rolling in three. And then a tight end position that just never had it. It was never healthy and then lost their best player pretty much as soon as he seemed to be going back to normal, or at least where he'd been. So everything's been kind of, fractured at some point, and yet their offensive improvement is pretty obvious, right? Again, if you just look at the numbers, it's better. And I think that Daniels has been able to pull some of that together. They've run in spite of injuries. They've passed in spite of maybe again not explosive players on the receiver positions. Offensive line's been pretty good, and that's been again a years long project. That's been good, but I think that just the relief and the confidence that comes from having competence at the quarterback position, I think that's like one of those tides that raises all boats, and they really did need that. And I think that there is some explanation there. Individually, stats aren't terrific. I understand that, but he has helped the offense and kind of given them more of a thorough all around belief or capability.
Yeah, and that kind of matches what I have seen at least. I maybe
Mhm.
would have thought the stats were a little bit more impressive, but I like Daniels. I do
Yeah,
think that he does a lot of good things offensively. And for Iowa State, Hunter Decker's first year starter. I remember we touched on that, kind of back in the fall, back really late summer.
yeah,
He's got a lot of talent, but the turnover bug has really hurt Deckers this season. That's something that I just don't think the Cyclones offense has really been able to get past. Has not been the only issue on that side of the ball, but it certainly has been one. It really reared its ugly head, kind of this last weekend against Oklahoma. And that's something, kind of leading into the defense for West Virginia. I'm not really sure how many turnovers they generate, but I would love to hear a little more about kind of the stalwarts on the defensive line and maybe against a secondary that's not so great for the Mountaineers. Deckers won't throw, maybe one or two interceptions, but he had what was called three over the weekend. One of them, it looked like it
yeah.
really did hit the ground first, it seemed, but a couple were pretty tough to see, late in that fourth quarter that hurt them against the Sooners.
They are a front to back defense, and if things get past their front, it's kind of buckle up. They do not tackle well, and I don't know if we had the best sources who were just telling us the trade secrets if it was that obvious. But the one thing that we got pretty consistently, well, two things, but that came pretty consistent from kind of the behind closed doors. Tight end position wasn't good, and they just could not stay with people, whether that's on their feet or in coverage in the secondary. And their secondary was a problem, and that's been apparent from the very beginning. So if they get past, a defensive line that's got some players and some talent and a collection of young guys and developing players and older presences, things can get adventurous. They have a spear position, which is kind of sets the edge on some of their run stuff, and they're going to probably be without two. They're starting to back up. One of them probably out for the year. That would be Davis Mallinger, and then Lance Dixon's a Penn State transfer who started the season at will and moved over to the other side to play spear. He missed last game. I'm not sure they know what his deal is. We're talking on a Monday, you and me, Nick, and we typically don't get that until Tuesday. So my point being, that's a position that's going to be down to third string starting. That's not good. Potentially, their Mike linebacker has been good. Last seen chasing Tay Barber on a 71-yard touchdown pass last week. I don't think you want your Mike chasing a 4-3 guy, and that's because things just get haywire back there sometimes. And their front is fine on defense. It's really good. Watch Dante Stills, watch Sean Martin, watch Jordan Jefferson, 55, 91, 95. They're good players, and they have some backups too that are getting better and or have been around for a while. But if you break that first line, you're liable to make somebody miss. You're liable to get a miscommunication, a busted assignment, something. And then that's kind of where things have been really hectic for West Virginia. And I know what Decker's numbers are and know what the reputation is this year. Do not be afraid of West Virginia secondary. They just scoop things up. They have a lot of injury troubles. I understand that, but it's not new, and they've rolled a lot of people in who played a good amount of football this year. They're just playing with people who shouldn't be playing, and as much or at all. And we're talking starting and key backup positions, and just a lot of explosive plays against their offense, their defense. And I don't know if they get right game, but certainly if I'm thinking about things for Iowa State, how do I get Hutchinson wide open in the middle? How do I do this? How do I do that? Because it can happen. Just how do you do it is the question.
Well, and this helps me understand a little bit more of kind of why Iowa State is a fairly heavy favorite compared to what they have been a lot throughout this season. I saw it, kind of opened at 5.5, 6 at a lot of spots, and now I'm seeing as we record, it's at least 7 points
Yeah.
in a lot of areas. You mentioned Hutchinson; he is that game breaker type that you kind of referred to earlier. So it will be interesting to see if this is kind of that connection. I mean, his numbers have still been fantastic,
Yeah.
but if it's a game where his connection with Deckers can improve, or at least, be built upon in terms of touchdowns. And there were a couple miscommunications in the last couple weeks between them. But clearly you feel that, Iowa State going against that West Virginia secondary is a spot where the Cyclones can find some success. What about the other way around? Where do you kind of see maybe an area or two where West Virginia can take advantage going against Iowa State on either side?
So I did some homework on this, Nick. Didn't want to leave you empty-handed with this. Last year, West Virginia was kind of in this embryonic state running the ball and just hadn't been very good. And they're better at it now. Like I said, their offensive line was a years-long process. But last year, right about the time where they decided that they were going to let Wyatt Milan play right tackle, and they kind of had some continuity in their lineups, and things started to, one week after another, the same and a little better, the same and a little better. And it's a modest day. It's 122 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns, but it was north of 4.2 yards a carry against Iowa State's defense. And then I think what's going to shock people that game is that Jared Day get a huge game passing the ball. But if you remember that game, a lot of West Virginia's success was built on running.
Mm-hmm.
They ran 28 times that day, and 22 of them were gap schemes, which, power, pulling, things like that. West Virginia really got after TCU last week, pulled centers, pulled tackles, kicked guards outside on the perimeter. Had not seen that much creativity consistently in a long time. They ran the ball very, very well against TCU. Why? TCU kind of keeps their pieces in the same place. They're an odd front. They don't move around very much, and where you're going to find them every game. John Heacock's defense a little bit different, not predictable because they're going to somehow fill that box to stop the run. But West Virginia ran effectively last year, pulling and using power plays and creating gaps because their offensive line were not going to be covered up. I would imagine the same is going to be true this year. And I look at the struggles this year when 3-0, I think it was like south of 200 yards rushing. Is that correct? Combined in the first 3 games. Here we go. 98, 58, 24 yards rushing. Since then, everybody's been over 100. And the last 2 are what, 190 and 180?
Yeah.
Texas and Oklahoma. And I looked at that, and there were power plays in there, about 17, 18 a game. So teams are doing something consistently to get to Iowa State. I look at what West Virginia did last week with their run game. Again, pulling, pinning, using your pieces and moving them to get out in front. It's going to have to be like that because they could be down their top 2 running backs as well. And the third guy hasn't made it out of the last 2 games healthy. So I don't know what they're going to do and who's going to play, but I just look at a way that they can be effective against that defense, which likes to play those 3 safeties and keep a cone on everything. But they ran the ball effectively against them last year. And some of what they tried last year, they sharpened and succeeded with against TCU. I expect that to be mobile and make the trip to Ames. We'll see how effective it is.
And that's really good to know, and I know that the fans will really kind of appreciate hearing that and listening. And yeah, that is something interesting because you mentioned such a great start for the defense, especially against the run early in the year. And, it hasn't been terrible by any means throughout Big 12 play, certainly in terms of kind of bending and not breaking. But Oklahoma was able to, kind of really move the ball. Well, Dylan Gabriel, the quarterback, didn't necessarily blow me away that game, but the run game led by Eric Gray, they certainly, I believe it was 182, just kind of off memory in some of my notes here, that the Sooners had. Mm-hmm. But health will continue to be a major concern for West Virginia. It sounds like at running back as well as kind of on the back end. I look for Iowa State. They're going to continue to try to establish this run game on their offense because I just feel like you can't put Hunter Deckers back there and ask him to throw nearly 60 times, which is what just happened on Saturday. He had 57 passing attempts. It felt like they were passing the ball a lot during the game. But then when I was looking at the numbers, I didn't necessarily expect that. I still think Deckers has all the talent in the world, but I don't think that's fair to, really do for any quarterback, especially at the college level. And so I think there's got to be some type of balance, whatever needs to be done to get there. Going against a Mountaineers defense that, I think you'd agree has not been a world-beating unit this season.
No. The Oklahoma running game led by place kicker Zach Schmidt. Did not see that coming last week. I think people are going to look at that score and be like, oh my gosh, Oklahoma got some points against them. It took some trickery. I wonder if West Virginia has anything up their sleeve, not because Oklahoma succeeded, but I guess I can spin some questions to you here now. Iowa State just makes games very low scoring. Um, that defense has succeeded. And again, Oklahoma gets some points last week, 27-13, I believe.
Yep.
But again, 7 are off a fake on a field goal, which did seem like a trick to Cyclones, I guess. But beyond
Yeah.
that, you even look at their losses here. Not a ton of points, and BTC did it, but that happens. But like they've had close losses and have done well in games where like they were in it and there was a chance for them. I don't know. It just seems like the defense has been okay, but the offense hasn't been as helpful. Kind of the reverse of what things have been here. But how has their defense been so successful and kept the scoring low?
Yeah, well, what I'll add to, kind of what you were referring to in the Oklahoma game, you mentioned that 7 there. And then the offense of Oklahoma was certainly aided because that final interception that I referred to earlier from Deckers, the return got all the way to the 2-yard line.
Yeah.
So really, the defense played another good game, especially the secondary. I guess I'll start with there. And I'm not sure if you remember. I think you've got a pretty good memory with this stuff, but I remember when we were sitting there in Dallas, and I said you asked for like a little something extra. I said I thought the secondary would be the best kind of unit on this team, and I didn't think a ton of people were talking about it. And I feel like it's certainly up there. I mean,
Mm.
health has been a concern, at least in the safeties group here and there, but Anthony Johnson has been really good. TJ Tampa had kind of what I would write and describe as like his national coming out party over the weekend against Oklahoma. He's been really good against the run, and it's something that I know he takes pride in. But he made some really nice plays against Marvin Mims on the outside. Miles Purchase is a good young corner. Bo Freeler at safety as an NFL future. So I would say the secondary, their ability to generally not get beat while also not being afraid to come up in the run game has been really good. I think a recent emergence of MJ Anderson along the defensive line has been impressive. He's a transfer from Minnesota. Will McDonald, All American,
Mm.
really one of the top pass rushers in the country. He hasn't put up the numbers that you would have expected, but he's getting a ton of attention. And quite honestly, I mean, there have been some highs in the linebacker room. Colby Reeder has done some nice things. A Delaware transfer. He's been practicing. We'll see if he is back for Iowa State this weekend. And then Orion Vance has graded out well, been around for a long time. Obviously, you recognize the name, a real veteran linebacker, and just kind of a playmaker in terms of consistency. So I would say overall, Haycock has had that unit, again, by most measurements going into last weekend as a top 10 unit in all of college football. It's tough that they haven't gotten kind of the help that they would generally need or deserve to win football games. But at this point, it feels like it's just about kind of squeezing the rest of the lemonade out of the lemons that you have left.
Mm.
And I feel like based on the highs that Cyclones have shown here and there, as well as the issues that West Virginia has, this very well could be a win at Jack Trice for Iowa State this weekend.
Okay. Okay. I misspoke. I said TCU scored some points on them. Baylor, 31 points. Nice total there. If you look at the other ones, the totals are pretty impressive. And I want to get toward this here because you're looking against again Baylor 31, Kansas. We saw the Kansas offense here, 14 points. Kansas State just scored 48 against Oklahoma State, only 10. Texas high powered 24. Oklahoma, you mentioned the two asterisk scores there, 27. Iowa State seems to have a gift of keeping the game close, which okay, that might just be snake bites too. But Iowa State also seems to have a talent of I would say like I don't know how to put this, but like doing gator rolls where they get a hold of you and they drag you into their end and they see if you can survive it. And teams they've gotten out of it. 5 losses, all pretty narrow. Last week's gets away, but we explained that. But they do get people into their game. They drag them into the ring and kind of fight their fight. How has that happened consistently? And what is it going to take to be on the right side of one of those finally?
Yeah, I really like how you put that. I mean, this team is honestly better than their record shows. I mean, not only by the margins, but if people watch and see how some of these games have gone down. I was at the Kansas game, I was at the Texas game, both on the road. It's things you don't normally see from most teams. How have they done it so consistently? I mean, you mentioned a few minutes ago that defense is not afraid to kind of shift and game plan into what they need to do. I didn't know a ton about John Haycock before I necessarily came and started covering this program, but I really couldn't be more impressed. I think that the buy-in from freshmen through fifth, sixth year seniors is all there. And I mean, again, I kind of see it every day in terms of speaking with these players at availabilities and what they say on social media, things like that. That defense is not afraid to have just incredibly high expectations of themselves. I think it was that Kansas State game where they allowed, I think you said 10 points. I remember it was like 10-9.
Mm-hmm.
And they even said, I remember Anthony Johnson was like, yeah, I can't say that we played a good game necessarily because we allowed this many points. And if the offense doesn't score, they can't beat us. So I just feel like the leadership, buy-in, and execution are all very high for this unit. I think it stems from a terrific coaching staff. And in terms of what is it going to take, Mike, for them to actually turn one of those into a victory, I know the defense has done enough. I can confidently say that. And offensively, just finding that balance. I mean, even when Iowa State finds kind of some good things in the passing game, I mentioned the turnovers that hurt them. But I do feel like this will be a game where if they get through kind of that front of West Virginia, they will turn it into a victory. I mean, they're favored for a reason. The team is about as healthy as it's been since the year open. And again, it is at home. Obviously, it's been a tough stretch, but it feels like they've got to get out of it at some point because the talent and coaching staff are too good for this to continue.
Two more for you, Nick. One thing we haven't talked about, special teams. Iowa State's had a lot of kicks blocked this year. 3 punts and is it a field goal or a PAT? I can't remember. But 3 punts. Not great in returns. Field position is not always friendly. You look for hidden yards. You look for X factors. That could be something here. I don't. And again, I'm not saying this because Oklahoma got a touchdown last week, but that just kind of seems to be the script this year. Their special teams have been kind of hold on to your seat moments here in all different directions, but mostly negative too. How much of a factor has that been in, and again, in field position battles, whether it's working negatively or having to defend short fields, bad plays, not being able to get a spark? That just seems like it has been a big part of what hasn't gone right or what has gone wrong at times.
Yeah, I think, if you haven't necessarily watched like every game, or obviously you're just trying to kind of get into this one, special teams haven't necessarily been an area of strength. But I will say, along that same line, I think it's been a lot better the last, I guess I would say, 3 games.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of inexperience in kind of those areas, especially kicker and punter, both true freshmen. So that kind of led to a lot of kind of lack of success or issues in execution early in the year. But again, I think that kicker Jace Gilbert has really come around. Tyler Perkins has actually really impressed me recently as the true freshman punter. So I think that as much as that could have cost them, and it did cost them early on in the season, specifically in the Kansas game,
Yeah.
they almost lost the Iowa game because of it. And yeah, I guess it certainly hurt that unit wasn't ready to defend in the Oklahoma game. But at least in a couple of those spots, I feel there's been some improvement. It's a lot of youth. And it's tough for me to say that since that kind of beginning stretch of the year and of conference play, that unit has necessarily cost them a win or I guess more so a loss.
Okay, good. Finally, really important name here. Rocco Becht. Dad, very good player here. Really good guy. A lot of people like him around here. And then I think a lot of people saw the name and figured, hey, this might work. He ends up in the Big 12 at Iowa State. Played in a couple games this year. The future is far ahead of him. It's not right now, but for people who don't know and haven't kept up, what has he been like, and what does the future look like for him there?
Yeah, it's very interesting because there was kind of a really intense camp battle
Yeah.
between Rocco and Ashton Cook, kind of for that number 2 quarterback spot. You did see Rocco get into a game earlier this year before Ashton. I think Cook did some nice things. But where Rocco is impressed is basically his ability to come in ready to work. And it sounds like the studying that he did of the playbook and getting a better grasp of things from spring to fall really kind of gained some love and praise from the coaching staff for that. I think that's a major reason that he did get in before Ashton Cook earlier this season. And it feels like just that kind of spirit and being able to do that as a as an 18-year-old, someone that did come to Iowa State early, so he was there in the spring and things like that. Those are very good traits for a young quarterback. I think that he's got a lot of zip on his passes from what I saw in the spring, and the growth has been steady. Now things will be very, very interesting to see, what happens with Cook, as he's actually a walk-on, but again, he's impressed. Iowa State's got another four-star quarterback coming in next year. But yeah, really, I've heard nothing but good things about Rocco Becht, and I know that he's someone in terms of his studying and work habits has done everything right off the field as well.
It's been kind of a rivalry before. They kind of tried to make this a rivalry for West Virginia, make it the Thanksgiving weekend. But now if you got a Becht throwing passes in the end zone against the team that his dad played for, that would spice things up, I think.
And really, really, all I like to ask, kind of to wrap it up, my friend, is, do you have a prediction and why?
I have a hard time believing that West Virginia can be this bad on the road. And again, this may just be the beginning of the end for Neil Brown, and we're just writing the final few chapters. But his teams have just been hard to push over and blow out. And they didn't go away last week, and they made it really interesting. But they just haven't been sharp at the start on the road. And they really got embarrassed last time they were in Ames. They beat them last year in Morgantown. I don't think that Iowa State has the artillery to really pull away in the first half, which is what happened against Texas Tech and Texas, 45-10 combined in the first half there. And their defense isn't good enough to play ping pong. So if they start hot, I just think, like, again, Iowa State's a team that makes you play the game in their style. So does West Virginia. Like, they're very good at getting in their lane. It's the right lane sometimes, but they're good at doing that. And I think if they can run the ball and just start well and play a pretty humble but pretty effective game, I do think this is one they can take. I just see their offense being good enough to do it. And Daniels, I don't know if you've caught any of his YouTube stuff or the way he talks about preparation or games. He's very interesting. I think he's probably been looking forward to this one here because it is such a unique and challenging defense. Doesn't guarantee anything, but my question for West Virginia is, can they get up on the road, especially after being so close against a top 10 team and losing it? And a lot of dark clouds around the program this week. It's going to be a challenge, but I really think those first 7 minutes maybe you'll have a good idea about them. But also, what's different here is that if they are behind, that's a team they can play catch up against, I think, because you might be able to score a little bit, not a lot against that defense. I understand, but I just can't believe that they're going to go out sheepishly like we saw maybe against Texas Tech and Texas. And my explanation there would be, I just don't know that the Iowa State offense can roar like those doing. That West Virginia's kind of takes one maybe early and says, all right, we're good. We got this, stay in our lane and go. And I think they have a chance to play this game the way they want.
And that last part is kind of what I was waiting to hear and kind of bounce off of. The Iowa State offense has to show me at this point. I thought that last weekend was the perfect time for them to do it against the Sooners team that ranks really poorly defensively in the Big 12. And the Cyclones were not able to do it. I'm not going to, leave you to be the only one to make a prediction. So I will do so, but I'm less confident in this, my friend, after what I saw over the weekend. I think that if West Virginia gets off to a fast start, the Cyclones are in trouble. Mm-hmm. But I think because of the back line of Iowa State's defense, they do have Coach John Haycock, who has just been so impressive. I think they are going to make it ugly, like you mentioned. And I think that the Cyclones are going to squeeze out their first win in a long time. I've got it as like a 25, 21, 22 type game. I don't necessarily think the Cyclones cover, but I do think they get out of it with the victory.
Big game for coaching. Like, not just Saturday, but like, how do the teams handle Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday this week? Game plans, emotions, stuff like that. It's a game they both want to have, can't afford to lose. And guys are on the headsets. We'll see if they earn their money this week, right?
That's spot on. It is a big week for these respective head coaches. I know what's been kind of said about Neil Brown and things like that, but we're wrapping up here. Thank you so much for hopping on this week. Thank you all for listening. We will see you next time on the Cyclone Scoop podcast.